Hey look, it's a wrap-up. I haven't done a wrap-up in what feels like forever, but it's only been 2 months. So this video will be featuring me mentioning every book I've read in the last month. I feel like when I realized what book was at the beginning of the month, I was like, wow, that feels like forever ago. I feel like August has gone really fast, but also really slow. Not sure. Here's what we're going to do for this wrap up. I don't want to do a lightning wrap up. I really just don't feel like it. That sounds awful to me right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to list out most of these books. There are 36 of them. Are going to get the name, a brief synopsis, what I did or didn't like, and a star rating, okay? But a select few I am going to break out and I'm going to talk about them in a little bit more detail. I went through and identified those ahead of time, but I'm not quite sure if they're going to stick. I may, like, when filming this, like, just get really cranky and decide that I don't want to talk anymore. So we'll see what's going to happen and how long this video is going to be. Where to start? Oh, okay. As always, these are in the order of least liked to most liked. Whatever. Am I even making sense tonight? Like, what's happening? Is there hair sticking out? What am I doing in this video? First up, DNFs. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 DNFs for this month. I believe I only have one of them hard copy. And I'm very, very sad to report that is A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faisal. I met Hafsa Faisal in March when I went to the Tucson Festival of Books. She signed my book. I was like, this sounds totally up my alley. I love tea. I love vampires. I love historical fantasy. I love heists. I was just so not into it. And I don't understand, like, I understand this is young adult, okay? But I don't understand why these characters had to be so young. I'm sorry. Young people don't do stuff like this. They just don't, okay? Like, there's no reason the characters couldn't have been 3 or 4 or 5 years older, okay? Even if it's young adult. Six of Crows did it, okay? She did not start a freaking tea house when she was 14 years old or 13 years old, okay? Nobody does that. Gosh. Anyway, that's not why I did it. I mean, that's part of it. Whatever. I'm gonna go. I didn't rate it. I don't think I'm gonna be unhauling it because she signed it to me. I don't know though. We'll see. Sadness. DNF. The next DNF was One by One by Ruth Ware. I think I'm going to give up on Ruth Ware. Unless one of her books really just calls out to me, which only one has. And that's the one I liked. Which is, what about the lady who dies with the will and the house? What's that one called? Oh, it's right there. The Death of Mrs. Westaway. It's the only one I've liked. So I think I'm just giving up on her. I'm done officially. And honestly, I was probably done before this, but I had bought this audiobook one by one in a sale for like $2. And it was just, honestly, to sum up, I guessed who the murderer was before they even started murdering people, okay? If you're gonna do and then there were none retelling, do it right or don't do it at all. This wasn't done right, in my opinion. Next up was One Star Romance. This is actually just a DNF for now. The library was about to take back my ebook, and I realized I didn't feel like putting in the effort right now. I was reading too many books at the same time, like 10 or 11, honestly. And I was like, I can't. It's gonna go back. I'll finish it later. So I will come back to that and finish it later. I was liking it pretty well. It's at least a 3-star book. We'll see if it was gonna get more than that. I was like 25% of the way in, 30% maybe. Next up was The Natural History of Crime. This was an arc. I always hate DNFing arcs, but I was not paying attention to it. Like I listened to the introduction, which was really interesting. This is a book by a forensic ecologist. And she's written apparently a couple of books before this. They were really well received about her experiences using forensic ecology to solve murders and crimes and stuff. The way it was written, it was just all over the place. I couldn't follow it. It was kind of dull. Occasionally there would be like an anecdote, but like she would do like each chapter is a case study, but the case studies get lost in all of her ramblings. And I couldn't do it anymore, so I DNF'd it. Next up and last DNF is Magic Kingdom for Sale Sold by Terry Brooks. I've been very uninterested in Terry Brooks until now, and it turns out for good reason. But then I saw a video of him being interviewed satirically by Jackson Dickert. I will link that below. The whole Between Two Ferns YouTube stuff is so great. I highly recommend it. And Terry Brooks was very funny in that episode, and he really took the prodding with really good. It made me want to try him out. So I looked at his stuff and I was like, oh, well, this one seems kind of interesting. It seems like fun. It seems a little bit meta. It's a portal fantasy, but it's very aware of itself. It's about a man who buys a magical kingdom for $1 million. It was published in 1986, and he goes there to be the king. I didn't even make it to the kingdom. He had just gone through the portal and was like meeting the wizard or whatever, and I was just not into it. The authorial voice wasn't there for me. It was just very plain. Nothing fun about the writing style when that premise should be fun. And also, like, it was published in 1986, and it did rub me the wrong way that you could only become the ruler of this kingdom and have this adventure if you had $1 million. So, yeah, I just DNF'd it. Okay, I know I've said way too much about these books, but I'm going to try and be a little bit more succinct going forward. I don't have any 1 stars this month, so we're moving on to 2 stars. First up is Every Drop is a Man's Nightmare by Megan Kamale Kakimoto. This is a book of short stories featuring, it's like horror, fabulism, and Hawaiian mythology. And I just really, it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. I didn't vibe with it. The writing style was very literary fiction, barely any characterization, no plot to speak of. Didn't enjoy myself. Moving on with my life. Okay, so this is my first breakout book. This is also a 2-star. This is my second of 2 2-star ratings, and that is The Grimoire of Grave Fates, edited by Hannah Alcoff and Margaret Owen, and they didn't have stories in the book. So what this is a book of short stories written by each chapter is written by a different author, and it features a different character, but it is one story like a novel. So it's a continuous plot, and the plot involves one of the professors of this magical school being murdered. And they have to figure out why he was murdered and who murdered him. Problem being, and I feel like this is a flaw they should have worked really hard to combat, and they didn't manage it if they tried at all, was that, and I said this in my review on Goodreads, it was like reading 17 first chapters in a row. In a novel, you follow characters as they grow and learn about the situation and interact with each other, and we were starting over every chapter. And then, of course, you also have the problem that all short story collection anthologies have. Anthologies being collections written by different authors, where some authors are much better than others. So it just felt really unbalanced, not that interesting. The only thing that was carrying me through were the little sections in between each chapter that were like found objects that were in like the case file, like transcripts and emails and report cards and pamphlets and that kind of stuff. The actual chapters were not that interesting, even the good ones, because I was like, I'm just gonna start over again next chapter with another character. My investment was so low. I don't know how they could have made it work. Maybe authors take turns writing the same characters. I don't know, but it just really did not work for me. And judging by the low rating on Goodreads, it didn't work for a lot of people. Interesting idea. They didn't really pull it off. Now, 2.5 stars, my only 2.5-star book, which was an audiobook that I read from Libby, and it was called The Puzzle Master by Danielle Trussoni. I saw somebody on Goodreads reading this. I looked at the premise. It sounded really interesting. Got it. Started listening to it. Really liked it at first, and then it just went off the rails. I didn't like that it was so speculative. Also, it's written by a woman, but it felt like it was written by a man, and that's bad. You know what I mean? No, you don't. I just didn't like it. It was too much for me. It's way too far-fetched. Not enough puzzles. Like this guy, the premise being that this guy was like a football star in high school, and he was going to go to college and be a football star, and then he got a really bad head injury in a game and he couldn't play anymore, but also that head injury gave him, what's the name of the condition? It's super rare and it's a real thing. But anyway, it made him very smart, and all of a sudden puzzles are like his favorite thing in the entire universe, and he writes puzzles and he solves them. There just was no puzzles in this book. Felt like a standard Dan Brown thriller, but like worse, because the puzzles weren't interesting. So yeah, I didn't like it. 2.5 stars. Will not be continuing in the series. 3 stars. First up, Planet Barbarians. I'm not going to talk much about this because there's a whole vlog where my cats recommended books to me, and this was one of the books they picked. So if you want my thoughts about it, go there. This is a erotic romance, science fiction erotic romance. It was entertaining. It was very entertaining. I won't be continuing the series. I don't need to see this dynamic play out again 20 more times. I wasn't reading it for the erotica. I was reading it for the plot. I got the plot. I'm good. 3 stars. Next up was a KU book that I randomly saw somebody reading and was like wanting something fluffy and something I didn't have to pay a lot of attention to before bed. And that is The Amazing Alpha Tau Boyfriend Project. Don't remember the name of the authors. It's 2 authors. Very KU, forgettable. Had fun enough time while reading it, but will not be reading on. Very female wish fulfillment in that one. Can't really recommend it, but had a good enough time. 3.5 stars. Beowulf. This is the second book that I read for the cat video. And this is a new translation by Maria Devana Headley, where she translates it using non-elevated language and current culture, current idioms. And it just didn't work for me as much as I wanted to. If you want more thoughts, again, that video will be linked down below. Some of the poetry was really cool. So if you're interested in translations of classic literature, this is interesting for sure. And then my next 3.5 star book. So this is my first light novel. It is also my first danmei, which is, I believe, is it just Chinese? Basically, it's queer literature, usually with men. This title, it's called The Disabled Tyrant's Beloved Pet Fish. Let me just quote one of the reviews on Goodreads. I didn't give it 5 stars, but this is what this review says. It says, this is the stupidest thing I've ever read, 5 stars. And I get it, because this was very stupid. It was exceedingly silly. It was so silly. So basically the premise here is that it's also an isekai, I believe, is what you call it, when a character from our world is pulled into an alternate world of some sort. In this case, the plot of a web novel he was reading at night before bed about a real historical figure who was an emperor in China a long time ago. When he's pulled in, usually they're pulled in like as themselves, you know what I mean? As people, but he is pulled in as a carp. This is not a carp, this is a koi, I believe, but that's part of the plot. He's pulled in as a carp, not a beautiful fish, not a beautiful looking fish. And it turns out that he's pulled into this, it's essentially a video game, but it's not a video game. And he calls it, the main character whose name is Li Yu, he calls it a fish scamming system because he's a fish and he thinks the system is scamming him, but it works like a video game where it gives him quests and objects to complete and to obtain, and they're frequently related to his new owner, who is the titular disabled tyrant. And of course it gets gay, but how it goes from this character as a fish to the gayness is the stupidest. It's so stupid. Also, the amount of times this fucking fish was out of his tank for so long, he should have been dead like 100 times over. There's a scene where one of his quests is to share a bed with Prince Jing, who's the tyrant. He's not a tyrant yet. He can't speak, so the emperor doesn't want to make him his heir. The fish's quest is to share a bed, and so like we have to watch as this fish gets in bed with this man, and then through a series of comedic mishaps, the prince ends up putting a bowl of water on a pillow. And then, like, somehow the fish isn't dead overnight. I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. I'm curious enough to read book 2, which comes out in December, I think, the translation. Here's the end. So, it's very silly. It's very silly. I don't, like, tell me if I'm wrong, people who've read other danmei. They're not all as silly as this, I assume. This is just really silly. Like all the ones that I see at Barnes & Noble all the time, like the cultivation one, and then there's one with a husky, and then there's one, I don't know. They don't look silly to me. They look very dramatic and sexy. This one is just, look at it. And then my last 3.5 star book, I believe. Oh, no, sorry. I had an audiobook that is also 3.5 stars, and then we'll talk about that in a sec. I listened to the audiobook of this book called Kill Show by Daniel Swerin Becker. This is a true crime novel, meaning it is a novel, so it's fiction, told in the style of a true crime book. And it's not just any type of book, it's an oral history, so it's a fake oral history of these events. And what happened is there was this reality television show called Searching for Sarah, and it was 10 years, the events surrounding it were 10 years before this book is being collected and written. And this girl named Sarah went missing, and her family signed up to do a reality television show, supposedly to get exposure for people searching for this girl and getting her face on the news. It purports to be examining the toxic, harmful culture around both true crime and reality television. But in reality, the Pippin is upside down under my coffee table, like this, with all 4 feet on the table underneath. In reality, the message is that reality TV and true crime are exploitative and bad and hurt people, and that's it. Really not much of anything to say that you couldn't have guessed while going in. So the main draw then is the story itself, and it really plays out more like a thriller. And unfortunately, the thriller aspect wasn't as good as it could have been because the author kind of shot himself in the foot and revealed some stuff near the beginning that he should have kept for the end or the middle. I mean, it just wasn't parceled out enough to maintain tension. It was a good enough time though. I gave it 3.5 stars, but it could have been better. Okay, and then my last 3.5 star book is The Truth According to Ember by Danica Nava. This is a book that I did want to talk about in detail. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, like I said. I ended up having a good time with this, but you could definitely tell it was a first novel, and it did some first novel things. It also had a premise that was very tricky, and I think it pulled it off, but it wobbled a little. The problem is that plot here is that Ember is native, and she has been trying to find a job. She couldn't go to, well, she was in community college, but then her brother got arrested for a DUI and then didn't show up for his hearing, so the bail money, the bond money that she put up for him was forfeit, and that was her college money. So she had to drop out of college, and she's been working at a bowling alley, barely making ends meet. So she's constantly applying for jobs, and as we start this book, she's applied for 37 jobs. None of them have even contacted her for an interview. Nobody. And so she and her best friend are talking one day, and they're like, well, what if you just said you were white? And she's like, it's not even really a lie, my dad's white. So she updates her resume, fibs a little, like stretches the truth on it about her work history, and then applies for some accounting jobs or work in an accounting office, and clicks that she's white. And she immediately gets a response. And when she goes in for the interview, she's hired. And the thing about Ember that really makes this work ultimately is that she's extremely competent and very smart, and she's actually really good at her job. In fact, she starts this job with no training, almost no knowledge, and she learns on the go, and nobody notices because she's very capable and smart, and proving that she can do the work even if her resume wasn't entirely true. But then she accidentally gets sucked into a bunch of a little bit farcical situations because her lies start to snowball a little bit, mainly because of, okay, how do you say his name? I'm gonna fuck it up again. They call him Dan at the office, but his full name is Danoa. Danoa is extremely good looking, and they are very attracted to each other, but there is a no fraternization policy at her work, and due to her own insecurities, she wants to make him hide their relationship, and then stuff gets weird. So the tricky line that I wanted to talk about is that Ember can kind of come across, if you're not fully tuned in with what the author's trying to do and you don't stick it out, as a little bit unreal, almost cartoonish at points. Either that or you're gonna think she's dumb, but the thing is she's not dumb. She's absolutely not dumb. I just think that the writing was, if this had been a more seasoned author, I think that the author could have pulled that off a little bit better, and she just bit off a lot in her first novel. Ultimately, I had a really good time. I liked the characters, I liked where this ended up, and I will definitely check out more books from this author, and I'm very happy to support a Native author being published traditionally for the first time in the year 2024, and I hope there are many more that get chances, because I'm very sure there's not just one Native person writing romance. that deserves to be published. So yeah, 3.5 stars. Now on to my 4 stars. This is the biggest category. I'm gonna glide over most of these. If you want to hear my thoughts about these, you can always check out my Goodreads. I haven't written reviews for some of these yet, but you know, I'm sure I will eventually. Okay, so next up, 4 stars. This is counting for 3 books, but I'm gonna just talk about them all at once because it's just one big continuous story. And that is the manga Blood on the Tracks by, what's the name? Shuzo Oshimi. And this is a horror manga about a family in Japan, a mother, a son, and a father. And the son is, I think he's 10 or 11. Yeah, I think he's 11. And he starts to realize that something is very off with his mother. And that's all I'll say. This is horrifying in a very different way than you're probably used to from horror, because you have to look at the illustrations while you're reading to get a lot of the story. Like, look at this bitch. Let me see if I can find, look at her. Just look at her. Oh my God, there she is again. So she's just, there's something. You can look at her and you can just tell. Something is not right. That's the kid. I can only imagine how messed up this is gonna get going forward, but I'm in. It was really good, and the translation was good. A lot of times I have a hard time with manga if it's not translated well. There was this manga a couple months ago that everyone was losing their minds over, and it was called Cherry Magic, but I just didn't like, the translation was so awkward. This wasn't awkward. I mean, you could tell it was a translation, but it was done well. 4 stars. Next up is, okay, so let's talk about Don Quixote. So I conquered Don Quixote this month. I'm very proud of myself. That book was so long. I buddy read it with my friend Paula because she loves that book. It's one of her favorite books of all time. And she likes it more than I do. I always, like, even no matter how good the book is, I always just think classic books that are like over 400 pages are too much for me. And this was 940 pages long. If this story had been written today, it definitely would have been cut at least in half. So like my sensibilities, and I just didn't know enough about the author or the time period or the literature style that he was parodying to fully get on board, you know what I mean? But this was such a wild ride. Like, it was genuinely enjoyable. Don Quixote, I guess there's a debate on whether he is actually insane or not. I fall into the camp that he is insane, and because otherwise to me it seems like, what is that cat doing? He's squeezed himself into a crack between the wall and the bookshelf, and he's standing on his hind legs. I don't know what he's doing. Anyway, it seems to me like the theme of what's reality and what's story doesn't really work if he is sane, but apparently there's valid readings of both. But the real star of the show is Sancho Panza. What a great character, man. He's just so funny. And this book, like, you picture classics and you think they're going to be dry and full of flowery language or impenetrable language that we don't really speak like that anymore kind of stuff. But the translation that I read, Edith Grossman, highly recommend. She is so good at her job. And she translates it so that we get the meaning, but we get it in language that appeals to us. It was wild. Just wild, like unhinged is what I kept saying in my Goodreads status updates. This book is utterly unhinged. It was written in 1605, and it's like one of the few classic books where you can be like, yeah, people were people back even in 1605. Like, they thought that this shit was funny in 1605. Like, there's a scene where Sancho is staying up with Don Quixote. I don't remember why he was refusing to sleep, but he was sitting on his horse refusing to sleep or move, and Sancho was his squire, so he had to stay there with him, but Sancho had to take a shit. So he just pulled his pants down right next to the horse and Don Quixote and took a shit. And just stuff like that is happening all over the place. It was good. The second half I actually liked better than the first half. It got really meta. Highly recommend if you are looking for an interesting, funny, engaging classic, Don Quixote. I need to get a physical copy. Real quick. Okay, let's do A Sorceress Comes to Call. I just finished this one yesterday, and I enjoyed it. It's not my favorite T. Kingfisher. It's a very loose retelling of The Goose Girl, and that's not my favorite fairy tale. I don't know why. I've read other retellings of it, and they don't really stick with me that well either, but this is the best one I've seen. And it's a really, like, harrowing depiction of parental abuse, actually, so content warnings there. Also, if you are not emotionally prepared for an evil, like truly evil horse, don't read this. But it was good. I liked it. 4 stars. And then the last one that I don't have a physical copy of is this book that no one has heard of. And again, Paula made me read it because she loved it. And it's called Miss Benson's Beetle. Don't let the blurb fool you. It's not like a chick lit book with like a guaranteed happy ending. Like it's just regular historical fiction, even though it gives off the impression that it is chick lit. I hate that term, by the way. I hate women's fiction chick lit. I hate it. 4 stars. I gave it 4 stars. I did have some problems with the ending, but I'm not going to go into it. If you are curious, check out my Goodreads review. I talk about it there. And then let's move on to my physical copies of my 4-star books. So first up is Silence for the Dead by Simone St. James. I really like this one. I'm working my way through her back catalog. This is her 3rd book, I believe. I've read her 1st book, and her 2nd book just got in the mail. I had pre-ordered they're releasing all of her old books with new covers to match the newer book style. And this one takes place post-World War I. So her older books, like pre The Broken Girls, they are all straight up historical fiction, but they're paranormal fiction as well as they all have romance elements. So if you're looking for straight horror with no romance, this is not the author for you. After The Broken Girls, she does dual timeline, like half historical fiction, half present day. Although her latest one was double historical fiction because it was in the 70s and the 90s. So here, yeah, it's post-World War I. The main character, who is not trained as a nurse, it kind of cons her way into a job as a nurse for this convalescent sanatorium set in the remote English countryside for soldiers who have come home from the war with shell shock. Their families have basically hidden them away because insanity and mental health is not understood at all. And it's really heavily, what's the word I'm looking for? Not shamed, although that's part of it. Stigmatized. It's very heavily stigmatized and not understood at all. And these men are viewed as broken and not real men anymore. And with all of that, ghost stuff starts happening. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. 4 stars. Okay, and next up is I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. So I love Stephen Graham Jones. His brain is a beautiful place. Maybe it's also a scary place. But this is not my favorite book of his, although I still really enjoyed it. It's also his most personal book, apparently. Like, he basically says in his afterword that the main character is him. Basically, he didn't do it on purpose, but after he'd finished, he realized, oh yeah, I've never written myself into a book like that before. So if you don't like the main character, this takes place in 1989 in La Mesa, Texas. It is a confessional style story where the main character is telling the story from 17 years in the future about the events of the summer of 1989 and what him and his best friend Amber went through during that summer. And the title should give you a clue that he was a teenage slasher. I enjoyed this, but it was also a little bit tough to get through. I don't know why. It just was hard for me, even though like it was written in a very personable, talkative, conversational style. It also felt weirdly heavy, and I think I was responding to that, and I have to be in a very specific mood to read it. Actually, it felt very similar to his book Mongrels. I think that's probably the closest in tone. A lot of people are comparing this to Jade Daniels in, My Heart is a Chainsaw, which I can see that comparison too, but Tolly is not Jade at all. And I love Jade and her books for very different reasons than I liked this. So yeah, I liked it. It's not my favorite, but I found it enjoyable. Next up, I read a middle grade horror book for Read Harder. It was no hardship because Catherine Arden has written so far, well, one of my favorite books of this year in The Warm Hands of Ghosts. But this is the first book in her middle grade horror quartet. And it starts with Small Spaces. I'm not going to go into it, but if you want genuinely creepy children's horror, look no farther than this series. Very impressive what she could do with barely any gore, no violence, with a happy ending. And it's a book about a child recovering from grief. Just all around 4 stars. Definitely continuing the series. Hold on. I'm out of water. Let me go refill. Hi, Pippin. Did you knock this off the table? I realized while I was up that I forgot to put my laundry in the dryer, so I put my laundry in the dryer. Let's keep going. 4 stars. Next up is The Ministry of Time by Kaylee Ann Bradley. So go into this with proper expectations. It is a first novel, so it does get a tiny bit sloggy in the middle, like with the pacing, like it just slows down. But also it is not a romance. It has romance in it. It has love in it. It's a love story, but it's not a romance. with its guarantee of a happily ever after. So just keep that in mind. But the real draw here is Graham, a book about a woman who lives in the near future. They've discovered time travel, and they use it to pull people out of history who are about to die and try to acclimate them to the future to see if they can do that. They pull this man out of a situation where he was about to either starve or freeze to death because he was on the expedition with the HMS Terror, and I forget the other name of the name of the other ship. Was it the Abominable? Anyway, they were stuck in the Arctic for 2 years and all died of starvation and other things. And they pulled him off of that ship. And then his caretaker is the main character, whose name is... Why did they not say her name? Does she not have a name? Does she not have a name? Did I not notice that? No, she's got to have a name. Okay, well, maybe she has a name, maybe she doesn't. I'm not going to sit here and try to figure it out. I hate that when that happens, when you, like, there's something that huge in a book and you just do not notice until way after the fact. This is the first book that I read this month. I really hope that's not the case, because damn. Anyway, I really like this 4 stars. Okay, next up is The Sky on Fire by Jen Lyons. She previously wrote and published, actually it's one of my favorite fantasy series, honestly, the Chorus of Dragons series that starts with the Ruin of Kings. And that is a very intense, very experimental, it plays with format, it plays with genre, it plays with all kinds of stuff, gender expectations, sexuality, identity. This is very simple in comparison. This is a straight up standalone fantasy adventure story that involves a heist and dragons. Very enjoyable. Go into it with the right expectations, you'll have a great time. Next up is a book that I really enjoyed, and I'd had it on my TBR forever, and I'm so glad I finally got around to it, and that is Blackwat Sister by Zen Cho. I've read all of Zen Cho's books now, except for the novella that was published. But this is a really good place to start if you are curious about Zen Cho. So she is a Malaysian author, but she publishes in English. She writes fantasy. This is a book that takes place in Malaysia, and the main character, as the book starts, realizes that she has a voice in her head. And that voice turns out to be her dead grandmother. And her dead grandmother was estranged mostly from her mother, who was her daughter, and has a past that nobody really knows that much about. Turns out she was the devotee of a god, and she was the medium for a god. And now that she has passed away, she is haunting her granddaughter. This one does have a name. Her name is Jessamine. She's haunting her granddaughter so that she can take over, because she has the potential to be a medium as well, her duties for this god, who is pretty dangerous. And it is very funny. It's also kind of sad and heartbreaking. It is very cool window into Malaysian culture. The main character is kind of a fish out of water because her parents moved to the United States when she was a baby. So she grew up American and her parents are still Malaysian. So they are the ones that are back home now that they're living in Malaysia again, and she's moved there with them to sort of like take care of them. But it turns out they don't need to be taken care of and that she's the odd one out. But anyway, she gets wrapped up into all this God stuff, and then she gets to also know like the secret history of her family. And it was really fun and really good, and I highly recommend it. Next up, we have Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This is a literary fiction book, but it is also a mystery-ish, although it is more literary fiction than it is mystery. But the main character is very lovable. I couldn't tell if she was actually old or just like she felt really old, like was in her 50s and 60s and wasn't that old, or if she was like elderly. Not important. But she's this old woman who lives alone in the Polish woods in the middle of nowhere, and she lives in this place like to be close to nature. And she loves animals. She loves them as much as she loves people. A lot of this is just her inner musings about things, her philosophy about things, but there's also a plot that people in her very small area keep dying. They seem to be dying in ways that have to do with animals. And she starts writing letters to the police saying that it's nature getting its revenge, and everyone thinks she's a crackpot, but she's not a crackpot. She's a little bit weird, but she's not a crackpot. I was having a good time, and then the ending came along and I was like, oh, this is suddenly great, and I enjoyed it very much. It's really hard to explain If you're interested in Olga Tokarczuk, who has won the Nobel Prize for Literature, this is a really good starting point because it's short and fun-ish. Also kind of sad. I feel like my favorite kinds of books are books that have like all kinds of different emotions packed into them, not just one. Recommend this one for sure. The audiobook is great. I switched to audio halfway through, and that was a really good decision. The audiobook narrator is great. Okay, so next up is The Mercy of Gods by James S.A. Corey. This is a book I was really looking forward to, and I think it delivered what I wanted from it. I wasn't expecting a 5-star read because I tend to start slow with James S.A. Corey. Like, I didn't fall in love with The Expanse until book 3, and that's a 9-book series, but then I went back and I read books 1 and 2 and 3 and just loved them and upped my ratings to 5 stars. So I feel like I knew going in that I have that with them, that I need to give their writing time to really get its hooks in me. So the character-wise, I was right. They don't have their hooks in me yet, but the overall story was very intriguing and I could not put it down. It did slug a bit in the middle, but mostly it was unputdownable because this is a book about human civilization on another planet. We're not told how they got there. They appeared there about 3,500 years ago, and they coexist on this planet with other forms of life. So there's basically 2 trees of life on this planet. Anyway, not important. We spend the first like 50 pages like with these scholars who are like politicking and being very petty with each other, which I think was a good decision because it set up like the stakes of what we were about to lose and what was important to these people. And then they lose it all horrifically when aliens come who are very alien, very scary. They way technologically outmatch the humans and literally, well, they don't literally decimate, they ochimate. So for those of you who don't know, decimate has morphed usages. The word decimate, just people use it to mean destroy. But what it really legitimately means is to kill 1/10 of. It comes from ancient Rome and like the legions, okay? Literally was not decimated, but the aliens kill 1/8 of the population on this planet just straight away, just to get everyone's attention. They don't care. They see other races, these aliens, they're called the Carricks, as animals, literally animals. They're like the epitome of entitlement. Everything is there for their use. And if humans do not prove themselves useful, they will be eradicated fully. So what the aliens do after we see this huge invasion and lots of violence and it's really freaky and scary, they abduct the elite of the planet and take them far away for months on a ship in horrible conditions and then give them the challenge to prove themselves useful. They present them with a specific task, which was, I know a lot of people haven't been very interested in that task, and I wasn't really interested in it either. So I kind of just focused my attention elsewhere, but towards the middle there, that's what I was saying. It was lagging when they were really focusing on that task, but it turns out that they shouldn't have been. It was sort of a red herring. And the main character, David, I don't know how to say it, David? It's basically David with an F, okay? And I think it's Welsh in origin, although obviously he's not Welsh because he's on a alien planet who knows when and where, like 3,000 years in the future. His brain works a little bit differently and he's very good at recognizing patterns, and he quickly starts, much quicker than anyone else there, starts to learn how the aliens are thinking because he tries to do that. We learn on page 1 that this man, David, I don't know how to say it. Wait, I'm gonna look it up. There's an ad before a pronunciation video. David. I'm not getting all the perfect sounds, but it's David. Okay, David. We learn from page 1 that this man is going to be the aliens' downfall. He's just gonna throw a wrecking ball into their entire civilization. So this book is essentially the story of how he comes to be in their orbit and get in position to do that. And we know that from go. And I think that was really smart because you know what the stakes are as they set the pieces. So you're more likely to be patient and wait for the pieces to be set and put in place, because you can see where it's going, which is that this guy is going to set himself apart and then he's going to destroy the shit out of these aliens. And we know that because an alien who is eventually assigned to work with them, he thinks they're animals, so not really correct, but is the one who's he's giving a speech at the end of his life. I think he's literally about to be executed, and he's giving a speech. And we get excerpts of that speech that say things like, "We brought the enemy into our midst and we had no idea how dangerous he was," or something like that. Maybe it's a journal entry, actually, not a speech. Anyway, regardless, I had a great time with this. I love space opera. This has really high potential for me to become a favorite series if they, knock it out of the park with book 2, which I don't doubt that they will. They haven't disappointed me yet. So I need to get back to my Expanse reread. I stalled out after book 6 because I didn't want to face it again, the ending. But I got to keep going. Anyway, 4 stars. That's my 4 stars done. We're done. So let's talk about 4.5 stars. Now, if I give something 4.5 stars, that means it was excellent, okay? It just wasn't perfect 5-star all-time favorite status, which is what 5 stars means to me now. Whatever. But they all have the potential to go up on reread. Let's talk about this book first, which I need everyone to read because it's great. And that's called Entangled Life. Now, this is not the version that I read. I just checked this out of my library because I happened to see that they had a copy of it. This is actually an abridged version of the full book. The reason you might want to check this out is it is illustrated. So I was super curious about all of these fungi as I was reading. And this book, I just paged along so I could see all the fungus. These little ones, it's like the ideal mushroom. Fungi are awesome. This kind of blew my mind. No joke. I think I need to get a physical copy of the actual book so that I can reread certain passages again, because this was great. I did it by audio though. The author, this was so great. I've forgotten nearly all of the really cool things that blew my mind, but trust me, they were amazing. It was even worth it to have to hear about the zombie fungus again, which terrifies me. 4.5 stars. Next up, not gonna talk a whole lot about this one. I finally started Veronica Speedwell. This is A Curious Beginning by Deanna Raybourn. Gave this 4.5 stars, obviously. Had a really great time with it. It was perfect historical fiction, perfect mystery, perfect start to a romance. I've heard that it's a pretty slow burn, that stuff doesn't really start happening, and I think there's 9 books out right now, so the middle of that. But I'm definitely in. This reminds me a lot of 2 series. Okay, if Lady Sherlock and Marie Brennan's series, the dragon one, Natural History of Dragons, those 2 series had a baby, you would get Veronica Speedwell. They're all very similar. Lady scientists, except for Lady Sherlock. She's not a scientist, but she could have been if she wanted. Historical fiction with elements of romance, okay? It's just great. Veronica is a lepidopterist. She is a butterfly scientist. 4.5 stars. It's great. I will be reading book 2 this month. Next up is a book that I literally finished this afternoon. Second book of the year to make me cry. Unexpected. And that's Loveless by Alice Oseman. So this is a book about Georgia, who is going to uni for the first time, but she's also extremely confused about her sexuality in a way that is a little bit more overt than I think it needed to be, which is why I didn't give this 5 stars. I don't know, maybe that's my bias. I am asexual, and this book is, slight spoilers, but I feel like going in, that Georgia, this is her story of discovering both that she is aromantic and asexual, or aro-ace, and that friendship can be just as beautiful of a love story as romantic love, because she is very upset in her process of discovering and accepting who she is. She's grieving the story that has been told to her entire life, that has been baked into her cultural assumptions. And it's really hard to do that, to unlearn that kind of foundational information. And I know that because I had to do it. You'd think that it's so obvious from page 5, Georgia, you're asexual. Georgia, you're asexual. Georgia, you're asexual. Why do you keep trying? And I know non-ace readers are probably thinking that, but it doesn't work like that. This book does such a great job of explaining what it's like to just assume, because you feel normal or what you think is normal, that you should be like everyone else. And the conflict that is so deep when you cannot do the other things that people they seem to do naturally. It's very confusing. And also you're constantly fighting, and Georgia, this happens to her, like I said, that story of how to have a fulfilling life, the story that society tells us since we're babies is you're gonna find someone, get married, and have a family. Like, that's how you do life. And it is not only that she's facing pressure from the outside, because she's really worried about what people are gonna say, not without reason, but also within herself, because she has to rewrite her own expectations for what a happy life can look like. And that is so hard to do from experience. And then there's this beautiful scene at the end between her and her new college roommate, Rooney. This gets very messy and dramatic, by the way, also, but the ending makes up for it, where they just like essentially decide to become each other's person. And I cried so hard. I'm gonna cry right now. So this is one that I could potentially revisit in the future and give 5 stars, but it just felt like, at least my journey to realize I was asexual was very subtle even in my own head. I was never overtly trying, you know what I mean? It was always just half-hearted subconscious trying. So her overt trying in here, which makes sense because it's a book and a story, but it just didn't reflect my exact experience, which I know is really arrogant, but whatever, loved it. Moving on. Now this book, I'm gonna put this back here. So when I learned that Claudia Gray was publishing an official X Files book that takes place after season 11, I almost shat my pants. Texted Lindsay, asked her, buddy read? And she goes, yeah. So we got a hold of our copies of the X Files Parah by Claudia Gray at the beginning of August, and we buddy read this. And we both fucking loved it. And I think we gave it the same rating, which is 4.5 stars. This is not a book that can stand up on its own next to, like, for example, these 2 books that are 5 stars. So I did give it 4.5 stars, but I rounded it up to 5 because I had such a great time with it. And also the relief that it gave me from this woman, Claudia Gray, this beautiful woman, fixing what went so very badly wrong in mostly the last 2 seasons of X Files, but really the last like 4. And it was just like the utter relief I felt that these characters were in safe hands again, meaning not in Chris Carter's hands. Just, she gets it. Claudia Gray gets it. She gets the X Files part of it. She gets the Mulder and Scully relationship part of it. She wrote this with full knowledge of all 11 seasons, 30 years of story behind it, as if these people had actually lived these lives and had grown as people because of it. Loved it so much. Tabbed the shit out of it. Really, like, if you're an X-Files fan, go get it. Read it. Buy your friends' copies. Get the audiobook. Get the ebook. Make the sales happen so we get more of these books. Please and thank you. 4.5 stars. 5 stars on Goodreads. The end. Bye. Okay, now let's talk about another book that made me lose my mind. And this is my last 4.5 star. I didn't round up on this one to Goodreads, so technically I should have talked about that one last. And that is book 3 in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, the Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook. I am officially obsessed with this series. I can tell you right now, book 4, I'm going to be in love with it. And then by book 5, I shall become unbearable. You will get annoyed with me because, as the Gen Zers like to say, this book series will become my entire personality for probably about a year or whatever. I'll just refer you to my mid-year book freakout tag for more information about Dungeon Crawler Carl, because I don't feel like getting into it right now, but just know every book gets better. The audiobooks continue to be amazing. Very weird combination of his very weird humor and the satire and the game element and the characterization and the, like, utter seriousness underlying it. It just works for me so good. Love this series, love it so much. Recommend it. Go have fun. Now let's talk about my 5 stars. So first up is one that I didn't really see coming. I thought I might like it. I thought I might enjoy it. I've been seeing this book since it was published, and I just didn't think it was for me. It looked lit ficky. I'm not super into lit fic. It takes a lot for me to like a lit fic, and I think this is lit fic, but it's also just really good. And that is Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. And yes, I did track down a cover without the book club sticker on it. It's my new mission in life. If they exist, I will find them. I will pay money for them, okay? This book was so great. I basically read it in one sitting. I never do that. And I say basically because I was forced to stop, do some other things, and then come back to it. But I could have read the whole thing in one go if I wanted to. I don't even like really want to talk about the plot here. I just loved it so much. I can see myself rereading this over and over again. The found family vibes are exquisite. The metaphor for neurodivergence was exquisite. The narrative voice, loved it. Loved the kids. I love that they light on fire. I just loved it. So good, 5 stars. And then my last book of the month, which it wasn't my last book, but this was my favorite book of the month. Another 5-star read is Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. So this is an author I've been avoiding since her debut novel, The Luckiest Girl Alive. There was just something about that book that like set off red flags. Like I wasn't into it. Like I didn't want to read it. I now have a copy of it. Well, I got it on Libby, so it's currently checked out. So I don't know, I might start it, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as good as this. So this book is, I don't even really want to talk about it that much. We're going to have to talk about it at a book club in 2 weeks, so I'm going to have to find a way to talk about it. But this is essentially, I don't know what this book is about. I just had it like, I just let it take me along. I mean, at its most basic, it's about a sorority sister, the only witness to the last, well, not the last, but one of the very last crimes that a certain serial killer committed before he was caught. And it's based on a true story. The murderer is never named. The author just calls him the defendant the whole book. And it's based on a real person, which she wrote a book. So I want to read that book. Kathy Kleiner is her name. And she is, a witness to the Ted Bundy murders in Florida. And so this is based on her story, but it's fictionalized, which some people don't like that, but I don't think I have a problem with it. Aside from other thematic stuff that's going on, this is very queer. It's very sad in some parts, but also it's like straightforward goal is to utterly annihilate the public image of the defendant as somebody who is smart, suave, good-looking, calculating, charming. He's none of those things. Basically, the thesis of this book is that a certain serial killer was a man, a relatively normal-looking man, and due to incompetence, misogyny, the patriarchy, just a whole confluence of factors, all these different people just started saying all these things about him, and now his public image is that he was handsome, charming, crafty, calculating. He wasn't. There's this great line in this book. I didn't tab anything because I was just too busy reading, but there's this great line where, I don't remember even where it is, where she's talking about how she caught him picking his nose more than once in the courtroom, and I almost died from laughter. Yeah, I don't know. It's so good, you guys. It's queer. It's feminist. It has true crime elements to it. It has elements of recovering from trauma. I don't know. I loved it. 5 stars. Favorite book of the month. If you've been on the fence about this one, check it out. And that's that. We're done. I'm at 1 hour and 9 minutes, so hopefully I can edit this down. I knew this was going to happen. I was going to try and only do like a little bit of talking about some of these books, and then I talked too much. This is the end of the video. This has been my August reading wrap up. Hope it was somewhat enjoyable for you. Please let me know in the comments if there are any of these books that you loved or that are on your radar that you're excited to read. And if you don't have anything actually else to say, you can always just leave me emoji. Leave me a knife emoji for Bright Young Women. If you liked the video, please don't forget to give me a like and subscribe if you want to. Really appreciate it. I'm still trying to get to 1,000 followers. Surprisingly, / not surprising at all, my cat video really didn't boost my stats. So, I mean, I knew that was going to happen. I hope you guys all have a lovely holiday weekend. I'm filming this on Saturday night, Labor Day weekend in the US. I'm going to go watch Farscape. And I hope you all have a great weekend. Farewell.